What really happened to Pastor Zachery Tims, the man who went from the streets to the pulpit, from drug addiction to salvation, and from fame to a mysterious death inside a New York City hotel room? How does a man once hailed as chosen by God, a preacher who built one of the fastest-growing megachurches in America, end up dying alone, surrounded by questions no one wants to answer? This isn't just another story about a fallen pastor. It's a story about faith, fame, and the kind of pain that hides behind a perfect smile, because sometimes even the people who save others can't save themselves. And when the truth finally came out, it didn't just shock the church, it shook the world. So grab your seat, because what you're about to hear about Pastor Zachery Tims will challenge everything you thought you knew about grace, redemption, and the human heart. Welcome to Celeb Spill, where we uncover the real stories behind fame, faith, and tragedy. And before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon, because this story is one you'll never forget. Before the fame, before the megachurch, before the spotlight, there was a young boy from Baltimore, Maryland, Zachery Tims. Born on April 18, 1969, his early years were defined by hardship. Raised by a single mother in a neighborhood surrounded by poverty and crime, he grew up searching for stability in a world that offered very little. By his teenage years, that search turned to addiction. Crack cocaine became his escape from pain, fear, and instability. To many, Zachery was just another statistic, another lost soul on the streets. But one night inside a jail cell changed everything. At just 19 years old, Zachery Tims found himself behind bars, facing the possibility of a long prison sentence. It was there, surrounded by despair, that he said he heard the voice of God. He later described it as a divine encounter, a moment that shook him to his core. He made a promise that if God gave him another chance, he would dedicate his life to ministry. When he was released, he kept that promise. Determined to rebuild his life, he enrolled in the University of Maryland, where he earned a degree in psychology. His transformation began to inspire those around him. He wasn't just preaching about change, he was living proof that change was possible. In the mid-1990s, Zachery and his then-wife Reva Tims moved to Apopka, Florida to start what would become New Destiny Christian Center. It began small, a handful of believers gathering in a rented space to pray, worship, and dream. But soon the crowds began to grow. People were drawn to Zachery's energy, his honesty, and his powerful testimony. He spoke openly about his addiction, his past, and how faith saved him. He was raw, relatable, and full of fire. By the early 2000s, New Destiny Christian Center had exploded in size. Thousands attended services each week, and his sermons began airing nationally on Trinity Broadcasting Network, TBN. He became a rising star, a voice of redemption in modern Christianity. To the world, Pastor Zachery Tims was living proof that God could turn even the darkest past into a beacon of light. But behind the applause, the cameras, and the success, there were cracks forming. Cracks that would soon shatter everything. As the ministry grew, so did the pressure. Zachery Tims was no longer just a pastor. He was a celebrity, a public figure, a brand. Every sermon had to inspire, every appearance had to shine. The demands were relentless. He was constantly traveling, speaking at conferences, managing church operations, and balancing a growing television presence. Behind the pulpit, he was electric, powerful, confident, inspiring. But offstage, he was tired, restless, and fighting to keep up with the image everyone expected him to be. Those close to him noticed changes. He began to withdraw, to isolate himself, to wrestle quietly with feelings he couldn't express. Fame, even when wrapped in faith, brings temptation, and temptation was never far from him. His marriage to Reva Tims started to crumble under the strain. The couple who once built a ministry together began to drift apart. In 2009, their marriage ended in a painful and public divorce. The separation sent shockwaves through the congregation. How could a man who preached about family lose his own? For Zachery, it was a turning point. He kept preaching, kept smiling, kept moving forward. But deep down, the weight of loneliness began to crush him. The man who had once been the symbol of victory over addiction began to face those same demons again, this time in silence. By the summer of 2011, it seemed Pastor Tims had found his balance again. His church was thriving, his public image restored. He was traveling often, preaching to large crowds and reconnecting with audiences nationwide. But those who knew him best saw the truth. He was becoming more withdrawn, spending long periods alone and traveling without close friends or staff. On August 12, 2011, tragedy struck. Staff at the W Hotel in New York City discovered Pastor Zachery Tims unresponsive in his room. He was only 42 years old. The news spread instantly across Christian networks and social media. Shock turned into disbelief. How could someone who inspired so many suddenly be gone? Police later confirmed that a small envelope containing a white powdery substance had been found with him. Weeks later, when the toxicology report was released, the world learned the heartbreaking truth. Pastor Zachery Tims had died from an apparent overdose. The man who once overcame addiction had lost the same battle that defined his past. His death shattered his congregation. Thousands gathered at New Destiny Christian Center in Orlando for candlelight vigils and prayer services. His ex-wife, Riva, stood strong in her faith, telling the congregation that God is still in control. But her pain was unimaginable. For many of his followers, the news was devastating. They didn't feel betrayed. They felt heartbroken. They saw not a failure, but a man who tried to carry more than one soul could bear. After his passing, the church he built with his own hands was suddenly without a leader. Many believed Riva Tims, his former wife and co-founder of New Destiny Christian Center, would naturally take his place. But the church's board of directors had other plans. Later that year, they announced that Paula White, a well-known televangelist and close friend of the family, would become the new senior pastor. The decision shocked the congregation and divided the church. Some members supported the choice, believing Paula White could guide the church through grief. But many others were furious. They felt Riva had been pushed aside, that the leadership had betrayed her and Zachery's legacy. The controversy quickly escalated. Riva Tims filed a lawsuit against New Destiny Christian Center, claiming that the leadership transition was handled improperly. What began as a house of worship soon became a battleground of faith, power, and politics. News outlets across the country picked up the story, turning the church's struggle into a public spectacle. Headlines read, "Church divides after pastor's death," and "Leadership battle at New Destiny Christian Center." In interviews, Riva Tims stayed calm and dignified. She said, "This isn't about me, it's about honoring what God began through Zachery." Meanwhile, Paula White defended her appointment, saying she only wanted to bring healing and unity to a broken congregation. But the division ran deep. Attendance dropped, members left, and the once vibrant ministry that Pastor Zachery Tims built began to fracture. Years passed. The lawsuits ended, the headlines faded, but the emotional scars remained. Yet something powerful began to happen. Riva Tims went on to establish Majestic Life Church, carrying forward the same message she and Zachery once shared: redemption, faith, and grace. Her ministry became a place of healing and second chances. New Destiny Christian Center also continued under new leadership, standing as a symbol of endurance and rebirth. Every Sunday, people still gather in that sanctuary, still singing the songs. Thousands gathered at New Destiny Christian Center in Orlando for candlelight vigils and prayer services. His ex-wife, Riva, stood strong in her faith, telling the congregation that God is still in control. But her pain was unimaginable. In one of his final sermons, Pastor Zachery Tims said words that now echo with haunting truth. "You can be called by God and still be broken. But don't let your brokenness stop you from believing that God can still use you." Those words, once meant to inspire others, now serve as his legacy. He was a man used mightily by God, yet human enough to fall. His story reminds us that the power of faith is not in perfection, but in persistence. More than a decade later, Zachery Tims's life still resonates deeply across the world. His journey, from the streets of Baltimore to the pulpit in Florida to the tragic night in New York City, reveals the fragile line between faith and human frailty. His story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth: that society often puts pastors on pedestals so high that they're not allowed to be human. They're expected to be flawless, unshakable, immune to pain. But the heart of Christianity is grace, and grace exists because perfection never did. Zachery's story is a mirror for all who believe, a reminder that faith doesn't erase struggle, it gives meaning to it. He may have fallen, but his message of redemption continues to rise in the lives he touched. In every sermon, every soul he saved, and every believer who learned that it's okay to be broken and still believe. Zachery, this is the story of Pastor Zachery Tims, a man who found God in a prison cell, built a ministry that inspired thousands, and lost his life to the same darkness he once escaped. But in the end, his story is not about how he died, but about how he lived. With passion, with purpose, and with a heart that never stopped believing in grace. This is Celeb Spill. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video. Because every story, even the painful ones, reminds us that no one is beyond redemption.